You wake up, shuffle to the kitchen, pour your coffee, and sit down. Then you sit in a car. Then you sit at a desk for 8 hours. Then you sit on a couch. Then you sleep. And somewhere in the middle of all that sitting, you feel it. The low-grade stiffness in your lower back, the foggy heaviness behind your eyes, the sense that your body is slowly fossilizing around you while you live your life completely still. You didn't run a marathon, you didn't lift anything heavy, you just didn't move. And somehow that's making everything worse. That quiet physical deterioration has a simple fix, and it starts with walking. Walking is the most underrated form of exercise on Earth. Not because it's easy, though it is, but because it does an almost absurd number of things for your body simultaneously. Your heart gets stronger. Your arteries become more flexible. The insulin response in your muscles improves, meaning your body gets better at clearing glucose from your blood after every meal without needing extra insulin to do it. Your joints, which have no direct blood supply and rely entirely on movement to stay hydrated and nourished, get the synovial fluid pumped through them that keeps the cartilage alive. Your gut motility increases. Your cortisol drops. Your mood lifts in a way that is measurably different from just sitting quietly. What separates walking from stretching or breathing exercises is that it is load-bearing, rhythmic, and full body in its metabolic effect. Sitting still for extended periods suppresses an enzyme called lipoprotein lipase by up to 55%. That enzyme is what your muscles use to pull fat out of the bloodstream. Walking turns it back on, not after an hour, almost immediately. The difference between walking and running is that running is something a lot of people can't sustain daily without joint damage. Walking has no such ceiling. It scales to age, fitness level, and available time. You don't need a gym. You don't need equipment. You don't need to hit 10,000 steps like it's a legal requirement. Research shows 6,000 to 8,000 steps per day captures most of the longevity benefit for adults over 60. For younger people, somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 is the range. But honestly, more than you're doing now is already winning. The person who walks 20 minutes every single day will outlive the person who runs hard twice a week and does nothing in between. The body doesn't reward occasional bursts. It rewards repetition, neve, or fossilize. That's the actual choice. Spinal rotation. Picture a tube of toothpaste that's been sitting in a drawer for 2 years. The outside looks fine, but when you pick it up, it's hardened in weird spots, the cap is fused shut, and squeezing it is more effort than it should be. That's your spine if you sit at a desk for 40 hours a week and never specifically address it. The stiffness creeps in slowly enough that you don't notice until you turn to reverse your car and your torso barely rotates, or you reach for something on the floor and feel a quiet warning shot in your lower back. That sensation is your intervertebral discs begging for motion. Spinal rotation is the daily maintenance your back needs that almost no one does. Here's what's actually happening when you sit for hours. The sustained forward flexion of a seated posture drives the soft, gelatinous center of each disc, the nucleus pulposus, migrating backward toward your nerve roots. The disc itself starts to dehydrate because it depends on movement to pump fluid in and out. Static compression slowly squeezes out the water the disc needs to act as a shock absorber. Over months and years, that becomes stiffness. Over years, it becomes disc degeneration. Gentle spinal rotations done daily reverse this process. You don't need a foam roller or a yoga mat or 45 minutes. You need 3 movements. The cat-cow on hands and knees, flexing and extending the spine slowly while you breathe. Uses gravity instead of compression to guide the disc fluid back toward the center. Prone press-ups, lying face down and pressing your upper body up while your hips stay on the floor, actively reverse the posterior migration of the nucleus pulposus. And rotational stretches from a seated or lying position mobilize the deep multifidus muscles along your spine that are chronically underworked in a sedentary life. What makes this different from just stretching your back is the specificity. You're not loosening tight muscles. You're restoring the hydraulic function of the discs themselves. Muscles can be stretched passively. Discs require cyclic compression and decompression, movement. To exchange fluid, a flexible person can still have a compressed, dehydrated spine. The mobility work is different. The intention is different. 5 minutes, every day. The stiffness that you've started to accept as permanent is not permanent at all. Morning mobility routine, there's a specific kind of misery to the first 10 minutes after your alarm goes off. You sit up and your neck is stiff. You stand and your ankles creak. You try to stretch your arms overhead and your shoulders don't quite make it all the way without a protest from somewhere deep in the joint. You're not injured, you're just locked. The body spent 8 hours in one position, and it needs time to remember it's supposed to move in 3 dimensions. That locking process has a name: synovial fluid stagnation. Your joints are surrounded by a viscous fluid that acts as both lubricant and nutrient delivery system for the cartilage. While you sleep, this fluid thickens. The joint capsule stiffens. When you wake up and immediately demand full range of motion from a joint that hasn't moved in hours, you're working against this resistance, and over time, doing it repeatedly without a proper warm-up is how minor joint irritations become chronic ones. A morning mobility routine addresses this before it compounds. The sequence matters. Neck circles first. Slow, controlled arcs that decompress the cervical vertebrae and get circulation moving into the structures that spent the night compressed by your pillow. Then shoulder rolls, which cycle the scapulae through elevation, retraction, depression, and protraction, essentially waking up the four directions that the shoulder blade moves in. Arm swings encourage the thoracic spine to extend, which is the direction it almost never gets to move in during the day. Hip circles warm the acetabulo-femoral joint, the ball and socket of your hip, through its full rotational capacity. And ankle rotations prepare the talocral joint for the weight-bearing demands that start the moment you walk out the door. What separates this from passive stretching is that you are actively moving the joint, not holding it in a lengthened position. Active movement fires the mechanoreceptors inside the joint capsule itself, which sends signals to the nervous system to down-regulate the protective guarding response that causes that post-sleep stiffness. This takes 5 minutes. Less if you do it at speed. It costs nothing. And the person who skips it spends the first 2 hours of every day operating at 60% joint capacity while their joints slowly dry out. The body has a warm-up sequence built in. Ignoring it doesn't mean you skip it. It means you do it badly, slowly, and involuntarily throughout the rest of your morning. Squats. Think about what you did today. You got out of bed. You sat on a toilet. You got into a car. You stood up from your desk chair. You lowered yourself onto the couch. Every single one of those movements is a squat. Not a gym squat with a barbell across your shoulders, but the same fundamental pattern. Your hips hinge, your knees track over your feet, your quads and glutes fire to control the descent, and then fire again to push you back up. You've done hundreds of squats today and probably called none of them exercise. This is what a squat is. It's the most fundamental lower body movement pattern a human performs. The bodyweight air squat is one of the most complete exercises you can do for your lower half, and most people either avoid it because it doesn't feel like enough, or avoid it because their knees hurt. And their knees hurt partly because they haven't been squatting regularly enough to maintain the strength to do it properly. The squat simultaneously recruits the quadriceps, hamstrings, and glutes in an integrated chain. It mobilizes the hip joint through its full flexion range. It trains dynamic balance. And the axial loading through the bones of the hip and spine during a squat stimulates osteoblast activity, the cells that build bone, which is one of the primary defenses against osteoporosis. What makes it different from a leg press or a quad extension machine is the closed kinetic chain. Your foot is on the ground. The force travels up through the ankle, knee, and hip simultaneously. You're not just working muscles. You're training the body's ability to coordinate multiple joints under load, which is exactly what daily functional movement requires. For the vast majority of people, a bodyweight squat performed with proper form is enough stimulus to preserve lower body function across a lifetime. You don't need a barbell. You don't need a gym. You need a flat surface and your own body weight. 15 to 25 reps per day, done consistently, is the difference between a 70-year-old who gets off the floor independently and one who doesn't pliv-ups. There's a fitness test they give firefighters, military recruits, and elderly populations when they want a fast read on someone's functional strength. It's not a machine. It's not a blood draw. It's a push-up. Specifically, how many you can do and whether you can do them at all. Because the push-up reveals something a machine can't, whether your body, as a whole integrated unit, can generate force while stabilizing itself. That test is measuring more than just chest strength. The push-up is a closed kinetic chain, full body pressing exercise. The primary movers, chest, anterior deltoids, triceps, are obvious. What's less obvious is that a proper push-up requires the rectus abdominis, transverse abdominis, and glutes to fire continuously throughout every rep to maintain the rigid plank position. Your core is not resting during a push-up. It's the thing making the push-up possible. The moment it switches off, your hips sag and the lumbar spine goes into hyperextension, which is how people hurt their backs doing an exercise that's supposed to be perfectly safe. The scalable progression of the push-up is what makes it universal. Wall push-ups, where you press against a vertical surface while standing, are appropriate for deconditioned individuals or anyone recovering from shoulder issues. The load is minimal, the pattern is clean. Incline push-ups on a bench or counter increase the demand progressively. The floor push-up is the standard full-body version. And at the top of each rep, if you push your hands through the floor and let your shoulder blades spread wide apart, a movement called scapular protraction, you specifically activate the serratus anterior, a muscle that is critical for keeping the shoulder blade properly positioned during overhead movement. When the serratus anterior is weak, the shoulder blade tilts and impingement follows. Most people have never heard of the serratus anterior. Most people have shoulder pain. The push-up is not a chest exercise. It's a full-body pressing pattern that also trains the core, stabilizes the shoulder, and scales from rehab to elite fitness without any equipment. If you can do 20 clean push-ups, your upper body is in better functional shape than most adults. If you can't do one yet, start at the wall. The pattern is the same: pull exercises, open a door, lift a bag off the floor, pull yourself up from a low chair, haul your carry-on into the overhead bin. The physical life of a modern adult is full of pulling tasks, and yet almost no one trains the muscles that perform them. People bench press, people do push-ups. People go through life with forward rounded shoulders and tight chests and wonder why their upper back constantly aches. The answer is that the modern world is a pushing environment, and you've been ignoring half the equation. Chronic pushing without pulling creates what physiologists call upper crossed syndrome. The pectorals and the muscles at the base of your skull get tight and overactive. The muscles of your mid and lower back, the rhomboids, the middle and lower trapezius, the deep cervical flexors, get long, weak, and inhibited. The shoulder blade starts to tilt forward and away from the rib cage instead of moving smoothly along it. Reach your arm overhead in this state, and the rotator cuff tendons get pinched in a narrowed space. Do it enough times, and that becomes chronic shoulder impingement. Prull exercises restore the balance. Resistance band rows are the most accessible entry point, anchoring the band at chest height and pulling it horizontally toward your torso, squeezing the shoulder blades together at the end of the movement. This directly targets the rhomboids and middle trapezius. Inverted rows, lying under a low bar or table and pulling your chest up to it, add bodyweight load. Pull-ups, for those who can do them, provide a vertical pulling pattern that recruits the latissimus dorsi and lower trapezius in a way no horizontal row can replicate, a detail that changes the exercise. Supinate your grip. Turning your palms upward during rows increases activation in the infraspinatus and lower trapezius, specifically the muscles that externally rotate the shoulder and keep the rotator cuff in a healthy position. The difference between a person with chronic shoulder pain and one without is often not injury history. It's pull-to-push ratio. Train what holds you upright. Train what pulls things toward you. The muscles you see in the mirror are not the ones keeping your body together. Core stability. At some point, someone convinced the fitness world that the path to a strong core was lying on your back and doing as many crunches as possible. Gyms still do it. Gym classes still teach it. The idea is intuitive. You can feel the burn, so something must be happening. What's actually happening is you're loading your lumbar spine with repeated flexion under load, compressing the discs and stressing the posterior ligaments, while building almost no functional stability at all. The core is not a muscle that bends you forward. It's a system that keeps you still when everything else is trying to move. Think about what the core actually does in daily life. You carry a bag of groceries and your spine doesn't collapse sideways. You reach across a desk and your lower back doesn't buckle. You sneeze at full force and nothing breaks. In every one of those situations, your core is working isometrically, holding position, resisting movement, maintaining the rigid column that lets force transfer through your body safely. The crunch trains the opposite of this. It trains the core to generate spinal flexion, which is a motion you perform almost never in real life that matters. The plank holds the spine in neutral while gravity tries to pull it into extension. The dead bug lies on your back and challenges you to keep your lower back flat against the floor while your arms and legs move away from each other, training the anti-extension bracing that protects you every time you lift something. The bird dog, on hands and knees, extends one arm and the opposite leg while keeping the spine perfectly still, training the diagonal pattern that underlies almost every athletic and functional movement in existence. The hollow hold creates deep posterior pelvic tilt strength in a position the body finds extremely challenging to sustain. None of these burn in the same obvious way a crunch does. That's partly why they work better. They're training the deep stabilizing system, not the superficial movers. Your back doesn't hurt because your abs aren't strong enough to crunch. It hurts because your stabilizing system never learned to do its job: balance training. Here's a statistic that stops people cold. Falls are the leading cause of accidental death in adults over 65. Not car accidents, not heart attacks from exertion. Falls, a simple loss of balance in the kitchen or on a single stair step. And after a hip fracture in that population, somewhere between 10% and 30% of patients die within the following year. Not from the fall itself, but from the cascade of mobility, hospital infections, and organ decline that follows it. None of that is inevitable, and almost none of it is addressed by standard exercise programs. Balance is not a passive physical trait that you either have or don't. It's a skill that is actively maintained or lost based on whether you challenge it. The nervous system integrates three separate streams of information to keep you upright: your vestibular system in the inner ear, your visual system, and the proprioceptive system, the pressure and position sensors in your joints, muscles, and the bottoms of your feet. All three systems decline with age if they're not regularly challenged. And the way you challenge them is by standing on one leg, walking a narrow line, or performing movements that require you to find and hold your center of gravity on a reduced base of support. The single leg stand is the simplest. Stand on one foot, hold it, work toward 30 seconds without touching down. Do it with your eyes closed to remove the visual system from the equation, forcing the vestibular and proprioceptive systems to compensate. The heel-to-toe walk, essentially a sobriety test, trains the narrow base gait pattern that becomes a fall risk when it's lost. Balance reaches, where you stand on one leg and slowly reach in multiple directions with the opposite foot, train the reactive postural adjustments your nervous system needs to prevent a stumble from becoming a fall. The difference between balance training and general exercise is the challenge to the nervous system's coordination. Not just the strength of the muscles, but the speed and accuracy of the reflexes. The people who fall are not always weak. Sometimes they're just slower to catch themselves than they used to be. Grip strength. If you could take one measurement that predicted, with remarkable accuracy, your risk of dying from any cause over the next decade, cardiovascular disease, cancer, respiratory failure, all of it combined, what would you guess that measurement is? Cholesterol, blood pressure, VO2 max? The answer is hand grip strength. Multiple large-scale studies across hundreds of thousands of participants have found that a 5-kilogram decline in grip strength correlates with an 11% to 17% increase in all-cause mortality and a 21% increase in cardiovascular events. This surprises almost everyone. It shouldn't. Grip strength is not just measuring your forearm flexors. It's measuring something deeper: the accumulated result of your muscle mass, your neuromuscular function, your systemic inflammation levels, and your general physical robustness. A strong grip is a proxy for a body that has maintained its muscle tissue and its nervous system's ability to recruit it. Grip strength declines faster than almost any other physical metric as people age and become sedentary. And that decline precedes and predicts the clinical conditions that ultimately kill people. You don't need to train grip strength in elaborate ways. Farmer carries, picking up something heavy in each hand and walking with it, build grip endurance in a way that also challenges posture, core stability, and cardiovascular capacity simultaneously. Passive hanging from a bar for 10 to 30 seconds decompresses the spine, stretches the shoulder girdle, and builds the shoulder stability and grip endurance that most people have completely lost by their 40s. Squeezing a tennis ball or a stress ball for short sets builds the forearm flexor strength that keeps hands functional as they age. What makes grip strength different from most other fitness metrics is that it's not something you can fake with machines or body weight alone. It has to be earned through actual load. Your grip is telling you something about the rest of your body that blood tests can take years to reveal. Hip health: there is a muscle your body has effectively switched off. It's the gluteus maximus, the largest, most powerful muscle in your body. And for most people who spend the majority of their waking hours seated, it has essentially stopped showing up to work. When the hip flexors at the front of your thigh are held in a shortened, contracted state for 8-10 hours a day, the nervous system responds by reciprocally inhibiting the glutes on the opposite side of the joint. The technical term is gluteal amnesia. The result is a pelvis that tips forward, a lower back that has to work twice as hard to compensate, and a set of knees that absorb load they were never designed to handle. Tight hips don't just cause hip pain. They are the primary driver of most chronic lower back pain and a significant contributor to knee pain that people wrongly blame on the knee itself. 3 movements address this daily. A hip flexor stretch, kneeling on one knee with the opposite foot forward, gently sinking the pelvis forward and down, lengthens the iliacus and psoas that have been shortened by sitting. This one stretch, done every morning, changes the resting angle of the pelvis for people who spend their days at a desk. The glute bridge, lying on your back, feet flat on the floor, pushing your hips toward the ceiling while squeezing the glutes at the top, directly reactivates the gluteus maximus and trains it to fire in its shortened position, which is where it's most needed for walking, standing, and climbing stairs. Dynamic hip openers add multiplanar mobility to the joint, restoring the rotational capacity that seated posture slowly removes. The relationship between tight hips and back pain is one of the most direct in all of musculoskeletal medicine. The hip is the problem. The back is where it shows up: fix the hip. The back often fixes itself: shooter mobility. You've had a shoulder injury, or your friend has, or your parent does, Or your colleague keeps mentioning the one they've been putting off seeing a doctor about. Shoulder problems are endemic in modern adults, and the cause is almost never a single dramatic incident. It's the slow collapse of the shoulder's biomechanical environment over years of poor posture, unbalanced training, and movement patterns that never include what the shoulder is actually designed to do. The shoulder is the most mobile joint in the human body. It is also the least inherently stable. It relies entirely on the surrounding musculature, particularly the four muscles of the rotator cuff and the positioning of the scapula, to remain healthy through its enormous range of motion. The scapula is the key most people miss. Every time you raise your arm overhead, the shoulder blade is supposed to rotate upward by a precise, coordinated amount to maintain the clearance space inside the joint where the rotator cuff tendons live. When the scapular stabilizers, particularly the serratus anterior and lower trapezius, are weak, this rotation doesn't happen properly. The shoulder impinges. The tendon gets compressed. Over and over, hundreds of times a day, band pull-aparts, holding a resistance band in both hands at chest height and pulling it wide, pinching the shoulder blades together, strengthen the posterior rotator cuff and the scapular retractors simultaneously. Wall slides, standing with your back against a wall, elbows bent at 90 degrees, and slowly sliding your arms upward while keeping all contact points against the wall, force the scapula into proper position and retrain the upper trapezius to stay quiet while the lower trapezius does the work. Controlled arm circles and scapular shrugs maintain the range and keep the joint from slowly losing the space it needs. The shoulder doesn't wear out because it was overused. It wears out because it was used wrong, for years without correction. Give it 5 minutes of daily attention, and it will function for decades without complaint. Ankle mobility. Nobody talks about their ankles until something goes wrong with them. Then they can talk about nothing else, because suddenly every movement in the entire lower half of their body has become a negotiation. The ankle is not a flashy joint. It doesn't look impressive when it's working well. But it is the foundation of the entire lower extremity kinetic chain, and when it stops working properly, the compensation pattern climbs straight up through your knee, your hip, and into your lower back before you ever understand where it started. The critical movement is dorsiflexion, the ability to bring the top of your foot toward your shin. You need this range every time you squat, walk uphill, descend stairs, or absorb impact during any activity. When it's restricted, your body finds another way. The heel lifts early, the arch collapses inward. The knee dives toward the midline during squatting, what clinicians call dynamic knee valgus, which dramatically increases the stress on the ACL and the medial structures of the knee. The hip compensates. The lower back compensates. A restricted ankle is quiet. It doesn't hurt. It just quietly redistributes its problems everywhere else. Calf raises, both straight-legged and with a slight knee bend to address both the gastrocnemius and soleus. Build the strength to control ankle movement under load. Ankle circles mobilize the joint capsule in all planes. Heel walks, where you lift your forefoot off the ground and walk on your heels, strengthen the tibialis anterior, the often neglected muscle on the front of the shin that controls the lowering of your foot and is critical for ankle stability. 3 minutes on the ankles per day is not a serious time investment. What it prevents: knee pain that cost you a decade, hip tightness that required surgery, balance deficits that became falls, is immeasurable. The foundation holds the building. Ignore the foundation long enough and the building tells you about it. Cardio. Beyond running. Cardio has a branding problem. The word conjures a specific image: a treadmill, sweating person, a number of minutes suffered through in pursuit of a caloric deficit. For a lot of people, especially those with joint issues or limited time or a general hatred of running, do cardio functions as an instruction they receive and then ignore. And in ignoring it, they skip one of the most powerful and non-negotiable components of daily health maintenance. Your cardiovascular system does not care whether you ran, swam, cycled, danced, or jumped rope. It responds to one thing: an elevated heart rate sustained over time. Cycling, stationary or outdoors, provides the same cardiorespiratory stimulus as running with a fraction of the joint impact. The knee flexion pattern under load is actually therapeutic for many knee conditions when done at appropriate resistance. Swimming is arguably the most complete cardiovascular exercise available to humans. It's full body, joint decompressing, and can be done with intensity at any age. Dancing elevates the heart rate, improves coordination, challenges balance, and is one of the most consistent long-term exercise habits in older adults, probably because it's the only form of cardio that people do because they actually want to. Jump rope is deceptively demanding, burns a remarkable number of calories per minute, improves coordination, and requires almost no space. What all of these share with running is the cardiovascular adaptation that actually matters. Improved stroke volume, meaning the heart pumps more blood per beat, lower resting heart rate, better arterial compliance, reduced blood pressure, and the mitochondrial density changes that make muscles more efficient at extracting oxygen. The modality is irrelevant. The elevated heart rate, sustained for 20 to 30 minutes, is the signal. If you hate running, the good news is that running is not the answer. Moving is the answer. Pick the version you'll actually do stochastic stretching. There's a window after exercise, about 20 to 30 minutes, when your muscles are warm, pliable, and maximally responsive to lengthening. Almost everyone walks through that window and either showers, sits down, or immediately moves on to the next obligation. Then they wonder why, despite exercising consistently, their hamstrings are still so tight they can't touch their toes, their chest is still pulling their shoulders forward, and their hip flexors feel like cables that were set in concrete years ago. Stretching works. Done consistently. Done when the tissue is warm. Done with enough duration for the Golgi tendon organs, the tension-sensing structures at the musculotendinous junction, to trigger autogenic inhibition and actually let the muscle relax into the stretch. That process takes 15 to 30 seconds position at minimum. Holding a stretch for 5 seconds and then releasing is not stretching. It's performing the first stage of a stretch without completing it. The 5 areas that compound into the most common postural and pain complaints when neglected are the hamstrings, the chest and anterior shoulder, the hip flexors, the calves, and the upper back. Tight hamstrings tilt the pelvis posteriorly and limit hip hinge capacity. A tight chest pulls the shoulders into internal rotation and forward flexion. Tight hip flexors tilt the pelvis anteriorly and compress the lumbar spine. Tight calves restrict ankle dorsiflexion and alter gait mechanics. A tight upper back loses the thoracic extension needed for proper shoulder overhead movement. What makes stretching different from mobility work is that you're not asking the muscle to generate force. You're asking it to release. The nervous system must feel safe enough to permit that release, which is why forcing a stretch aggressively produces the opposite effect. The muscle contracts protectively, and the stretch is counterproductive. Consistency, not intensity, is the mechanism. The person who stretches the same 5 positions for 15 minutes every day for a year is transformed. The person who does a 45-minute yoga class twice a month and calls it done is not breathing exercises. You've done it roughly 20,000 times today without thinking about it. Every breath you've taken, in, out, has been governed almost entirely by the unconscious systems of your brainstem, and you've been available to think about other things because of that automation. But the fact that breathing is automatic does not mean it's optimal. For the majority of adults, the way they breathe at rest, shallow, chest-dominant, rapid, is actively working against their physical and cognitive performance. The technique that changes this is diaphragmatic breathing. The diaphragm is the primary breathing muscle, a dome-shaped structure that sits beneath the lungs and contracts downward to create the negative pressure that draws air in. In chest-dominant breathers, the diaphragm is underused. The upper chest, neck, and accessory breathing muscles do the work instead. This chronically elevates the sympathetic nervous system tone, the stress response, and reduces the volume of air entering the lungs per breath. It's a physiological state that mimics low-grade chronic anxiety because it creates the same physical pattern, diaphragmatic breathing, placing one hand on the chest and one on the belly, and learning to expand the belly on the inhale without the chest rising. Retrains the primary respiratory pattern. Box breathing, which involves inhaling for 4 counts, holding for 4, exhaling for 4, and holding again for 4, teaches the voluntary control of breath rate that directly modulates heart rate variability. Slow nasal breathing specifically, in through the nose for a longer count than you exhale, delivers endogenous nitric oxide produced in the nasal passages into the lungs, which is a vasodilator. Blood pressure responds. Cardiovascular efficiency improves. Breathwork is also one of the most direct on-ramps to the parasympathetic nervous system available without medication or special equipment. The vagus nerve responds to slow exhalation specifically. Extended exhalations lower heart rate, reduce cortisol, and shift the nervous system out of fight or flight and into rest and digest within minutes. You've been breathing wrong your entire life. 2 minutes of doing it right will feel unfamiliar and then profoundly calming. The lungs have been waiting for this conversation since you were born. The 10-minute daily routine. Here's where everything above becomes something you can actually do tomorrow morning. Without a gym, without equipment, in a space the size of your living room. The routine runs 10 to 12 minutes. It was built to hit every major system: cardiovascular priming, joint mobilization, strength, core stability, balance, and autonomic recovery in a single sequence that flows from one movement to the next without rest. Start with 1 minute of walking in place or around the room. This is not filler. It elevates core temperature, initiates blood flow to the extremities, and begins the process of lowering synovial fluid viscosity in the joints before you ask them to move. Then 30 seconds of neck circles, slow, controlled, both directions. Then 30 seconds of shoulder rolls, forward and backward, letting the shoulder blade complete its full circuit. Then 30 seconds of hip circles, hands on hips, drawing large clockwise and counterclockwise arcs, feeling the joint capsule stretch and rotation. Then 1 minute of air squats. Feet shoulder width apart, toes turned slightly out, depth until the thighs are parallel to the floor or as low as is comfortable. Stand fully between reps. This isn't about burning out, it's about training the pattern. Then 1 minute of push-ups at whatever variation is appropriate for your current level. Then 1 minute of banded rows, or the best pulling motion available to you. Even a resistance band, anchored in a door, or an inverted row under a table. 1 minute of a plank, straight line from heels to head, braced like something is about to hit you in the stomach. Then 1 minute of glute bridges, feet flat, hips driven up, squeeze at the top, controlled descent. Then 1 minute of single leg balance, 30 seconds per side, eyes open to start, eyes closed when that becomes easy. 1 minute of static stretching for whatever feels tightest. Most people will go to hamstrings, hip flexors, or chest. And finish with 1 minute of slow nasal breathing, 4 counts in, 6 counts out, no rushing. 12 minutes. Every system touched. Every day it works. Common exercise mistakes. You can do everything in this script and still undermine most of it with a handful of habits that are so common they've started to seem normal. The first is doing too much, too soon, driven by the logic that if some movement is good, then more is better. The body adapts to exercise during recovery, not during the exercise itself. A training stimulus that exceeds what the body can recover from in 24 hours doesn't produce faster progress. It produces injury, fatigue, and the kind of discouragement that ends exercise habits. Skipping the warm-up is the second. It's always the warm-up. Cold muscles generate more force than the connective tissue can safely absorb. The warm-up is not optional preparation. It's the first part of the session, and the part most directly correlated with injury prevention. Ignoring recovery means ignoring sleep, hydration, and nutrition, the 3 levers that determine how much of the workout signal the body converts into actual adaptation. You can't out-exercise inadequate sleep. The hormonal environment for muscle repair and growth is almost entirely determined by what happens in deep sleep stages. Bad form is slow-motion injury. Every repetition performed with compromised mechanics is a small deposit into a joint damage account that eventually gets collected. And then there is the most insidious modern mistake, sitting all day immediately after exercising. Research has shown that the metabolic benefits of a 30-minute workout can be substantially blunted by 6 subsequent hours of uninterrupted sitting. The LPL enzyme activity, the GUT4 translocation, the improved glucose clearance, these are active processes that are suppressed by inactivity. Exercise is not a protective shield you earn once per day. Movement needs to be distributed across the day, not concentrated in 1 hour and then abandoned. The work doesn't count if you immediately undo it. Staying consistent. Here's the truth about motivation. It's unreliable. It peaks when you start, disappears when novelty fades, and is completely absent on the morning after a bad night of sleep when the floor is cold and the routine seems pointless. Any exercise plan built on motivation will fail eventually. Not because you're weak, because that's how motivation works for everyone. What actually sustains daily movement is habit architecture. Habit stacking is the most powerful behavioral tool available. Identify a habit you already do every single day without thinking, making coffee, brushing teeth, sitting down to start work, and immediately attach the exercise to it. Not I'll work out in the morning, but after I start the coffee machine, I do 5 minutes of mobility. The existing habit acts as the trigger. The new behavior becomes automatic over time in a way willpower-based commitments never do. Performing the routine at the same time every day reduces the decision-making friction that slowly erodes habits. When the question is not, should I exercise today, but it's 7 a.m., so this is what happens now. The cognitive load is gone and compliance rises dramatically. Keeping the routine short is more important than making it comprehensive. A 6-minute routine that happens every day is worth more than a 60-minute routine that happens when the schedule cooperates, which is less and less often. Tracking streaks, even informally, with a check mark on a calendar, creates a loss aversion psychology around the habit. Missing one day becomes something you want to avoid because you don't want to break the chain, and make it enjoyable. A walk with a podcast you love is a walk you'll take tomorrow. A walk in silence on a route you find boring is optional. Make the exercise the frame for something else you already want. The music, the audiobook, the outdoor air, the solo time. The healthiest people in the world are not the ones with the best genetics or the most discipline. They're the ones who found a version of movement they'll never stop choosing. Daily routine by age. The exercises in this script are universal. The emphasis changes as the body does. In your 20s, the priority is building. Bone density peaks somewhere around 25 to 30 and then gradually begins to decline for the rest of your life. The bone you build now is the reserve you draw from later. This is the decade to establish the strength base. Progressive resistance, heavier loads when recovery allows, patterns that train the major movement foundations: squats, pulls, pushes, carries. The body is at peak adaptive capacity. Use it in your 30s. Maintaining muscle mass becomes the primary focus alongside what you built in the previous decade. Sarcopenia, the age-related loss of muscle mass, begins earlier than most people expect, with measurable declines appearing in some individuals by the late 30s in the absence of resistance training. The training approach doesn't change dramatically, but the attention to recovery and nutrition becomes more important because the body's capacity to bounce back from a hard session has modestly decreased. In your 40s, mobility and joint health require equal billing with strength. Decades of accumulated postural habits, old injuries, and connective tissue changes mean that the quality of movement becomes as important as the quantity. Hip mobility, thoracic rotation, shoulder health. These are the areas that determine whether the strength you've maintained can still be expressed in full, pain-free range of motion. In your 50s, balance training moves toward the top of the hierarchy. The postural reflexes that prevent falls slow measurably in this decade without deliberate training. Flexibility work expands because joint compliance decreases with hormonal changes. Cardiorespiratory training remains essential for cardiovascular health but modulates in intensity. In your 60s and beyond, the single most important metric is functional independence. The ability to stand from the floor, carry groceries, climb stairs, dress without assistance. These are the actual outcomes that determine quality of life. Not performance metrics, not aesthetics, not competitive standards. Functional movement is the training goal because functional movement is the life goal. The exercises are the same across all of these decades. The urgency just shifts as the consequences of neglect become less abstract. For busy people, you don't have time. This is the truth of most adults most days, and dismissing it with "everyone has 24 hours" is unhelpful and slightly condescending. Real schedules have early meetings, late pickups, commutes, meals that don't prepare themselves, and the particular exhaustion of caring about too many things simultaneously. But the biology doesn't care about your schedule. The LPL enzyme activity drops whether you were busy or not. The spine compresses while you're on your third back-to-back meeting just as efficiently as it would if you were watching television. The muscle you don't stimulate today is marginally less there tomorrow. The research on exercise snacking has become very encouraging for exactly this reason. Exercise snacks are micro-sessions of movement, 2 to 5 minutes, distributed throughout the day rather than concentrated in a single block. A study published in a major clinical journal found that 3 5-minute walks after meals improved blood glucose regulation more effectively than a single 15-minute post-meal walk. The distribution of movement, not just its total duration, matters. 5 minutes in the morning before the first meeting, mobility and a few squats. 2 minutes between video calls, a plank and some hip hinges. A walk during a lunch break that doubles as a phone call. 10 minutes in the evening, a pulling exercise and a stretch sequence. Cumulatively, this is 20 minutes of structured movement distributed across a full day, and the metabolic and structural benefits are comparable to, in some contexts superior to, the same 20 minutes done at once. The barrier is not always time. Sometimes it's the mental framing that exercise must be a defined separate event in your day to count. It counts in 5-minute increments. It counts in the stairwell. It counts at your standing desk. It counts whenever you choose it. Short sessions, repeated daily over years, are how the longest, most functional lives are built. They're unglamorous, and they're very hard to argue with.